Not all country names are created equal. Some have truly fascinating stories behind them, and we've covered many of them over the years, and others meanwhile are a tad more to the point. For every interesting country name, like Mexico being named after an ancient god, or Japan's name meaning the land of the rising sun, we have less inspired ones like Norway simply meaning the North Way, or South Africa as the country is on the southern tip of Africa. These kinds of names are pretty boring to say the least, and are pretty bad from an etymological perspective. What I find most annoying about these names is that they don't really reflect in any meaningful way the people, history or cultures of the land. In no way am I saying these poorly named countries are bad unto themselves, their names are kind of just a bit boring. But neither Norway nor South Africa, in my eyes, takes the title of the most boring or worst named country on our planet. For me personally, that reward instead goes to the Central African Republic. This is a country that doesn't get all that much attention on the world stage. Unsurprisingly, this country is a republic in Central Africa. It has a land area of over 240,000 miles squared and a population of just over 5.5 million people. The country is full to the brim with beautiful landscapes, housing part of the Congo rainforest, and has an abundance of incredible wildlife. This is a really interesting country, but its name conveys none of that excitement. I don't think I've ever spoken about this country in any meaningful way, and that's because of just how bland its name is. You don't need me to explain this one. But even though this is the case, I can still mine some precious content out of it. Trust me, there's nothing I can't stretch out into a 10-minute or so video. So instead of just explaining this country's name, we could instead look into why it has such a boring name, and quite possibly the worst name. People have been living in this part of the world for a huge amount of time, with there being evidence of human settlement here from as far back as 10,000 years ago. For context, the pyramids in Egypt, which are super old, were only built around 4,000 to 5,000 years ago. Yet despite this land housing humans for so long, we don't really have any ancient names for the area. The earliest known of name we have for the location which makes up this modern country comes to us in just the early 20th century. It was during this period that the scramble for Africa was happening. It was a period of time when foreign powers were realizing that the land of the continent could benefit them for a variety of reasons, so carved up the content for themselves, all without the true consent of the people of Africa itself. It was a harsh, vicious time in human history, and shaped so much of the modern continent of Africa. The land that became the Central African Republic fell under French rule during all of this. While the land was under French rule, they didn't call it the Central African Republic. Instead, they titled this land claim Ubanga Shari. This name derives from the name of two rivers that run through the land, the Ubangi River and the Shari River. This colony came into being in 1903, and France would rule the land for centuries. They would have a huge impact in the land, and to this day, French is still an official language, and many in the country still speak the tongue. The country only gained independence in the year 1960. It was along with this freedom that the country's name changed from Ubanga Shari to the one we know today, the Central African Republic. This is the name the country has had ever since, except for a brief stint in 1976 to 1979 where it was dubbed the Central African Empire. This is because their president at the time, Jean Bedel Bokassa, declared himself emperor. From the fact this empire only lasted 3 years, I'm sure you can all imagine it didn't end all that well. Suffice to say, Ubangi Shari is a far more exotic, interesting and unique sounding name for this country, as opposed to just the Central African Republic, especially for English speakers like myself. So why did they decide to ditch the name Ubangi Shari and go with Central African Republic? I personally imagine that this name change happened to rid the land of its colonial past. This is something we've seen with other nations too, and it's completely understandable. The Central Africans were their own free people now, and they wouldn't want to be known under a name placed on them by their former colonial rulers. This is just my own theory on the matter, but it's something we've seen in the past. While that's my theory on why the name changed, we have actual evidence as to why the name they landed on was the Central African Republic. Seemingly, this title change was the brainchild of one particular person, that being one Barthélemy Boganda, the first president of the freshly independent Central African Republic. He picked this name for this country as he was thinking big picture. He had a vision for not just his country but for many countries across the continent. This vision he dubbed the United States of Latin Africa. This was Boganda's concept for the nations of Africa which were all once ruled by European powers who speak a Romance language, with these tongues all coming from the ancient language of Latin, hence the name of this proposed union. The idea was to include 10 countries within this union, those being the Central African Republic of course, but also Angola, Burundi, Cameroon, Chad, the Democratic Republic of the Congo and the Republic of the Congo, Equatorial Guinea, Gabon and Rwanda. All 10 of these countries were either colonized by France or Portugal, both Latin-speaking countries, so they all fit the bill for that proposed name. Boganda wanted to create this new United States because he genuinely believed that by joining together, they could have more power and sway, as well as a louder voice on the global stage. Part of this idea included a name he gave for his own country. He dubbed his country the Central African Republic as something of a show of solidarity and hopefully inspire others to follow suit. The name implies that the country is not a standalone nation, but instead part of a wider union with other countries. Perhaps he envisioned that other countries in this pack would have similar names, like Angola becoming the West African Republic, and so on. Of course, the United States of Latin Africa never really came into being. The other countries just weren't on board with the concept. Yet despite this, Boganda kept that name for his country as a remnant of his vision for a huge part of Africa. If this did go to plan and all these countries became a single nation, then today, the United States of Latin Africa would have a population of over 240 million people, and easily be one of the largest countries on the planet. So while the name Central African Republic might seem incredibly boring and bland to us now, it was given to the land with some good intentions and a surprising amount of thought. This name would make all the sense in the world if those other countries who were supposed to be part of the United States of Latin Africa didn't back out. It's kind of like if you and all your mates agreed to go out on a Saturday night all in silly fancy dress and landed on being the Spice Girls. Yet when you go to the pub, all your friends are backed out and suddenly you're there alone dressed as Sporty Spice. That might sound like a really dumb analogy, but for anyone who's been to the pub on a Saturday night, you know it's a real possibility. Knowing this history, the name makes all the sense in the world, but without this context, the name in a vacuum comes off as incredibly boring, and quite possibly the worst country name in my eyes. So maybe it's time we actually do something about it. The USLA isn't happening anytime soon, so maybe the Central African Republic should stop trying to make it a thing via their name. Maybe they should instead find a new, more unique name for their country, and rid planet Earth from this dull title. Now, this is all hypothetical. As far as I can tell, there's no actual plan to change this country's name. This is just me mulling over things to pad out this video. Like I said, I need to hit that 10-minute mark. But if they did somehow decide to change its name, then what could they change it to? Well, thankfully, we as a species have come up with naming conventions for countries. We can use these conventions to create a new hypothetical name for the land. Pretty much every country's name comes with just one of 4 origins. They're either named after their location, named after a geographical feature in the land, named after a tribe or ethnic group of people from the land, or named after a noteworthy individual. Surely one of these conventions could give us a more unique name for this land, right? We can, however, immediately cross out the named after their location option. This is because the Central African Republic already has a name based on its location, and it's really boring. In fact, most of the more dull country names fit this convention. Honestly, we should scrap it entirely. Maybe I will when I finally become the king of names. As for naming the land after a geographic feature, we could go with the older name of Ubangi-Shali, as that comes from the name of 2 rivers. But once again, this isn't perfect, as we've already ditched this name before. I doubt they would want to go back to it. We could use another feature, however. The country's tallest mountain is called Mount Ngawi. Just Ngawi unto itself could be a great name for this one. Then we have the idea of naming after a tribe or group of people. For this one, we could look into the largest ethnic group in the land, this being the Gabaya people. They make up around a third of this incredibly diverse country. We could easily use their name as the name for the country, making something like Gabania or simply Gabaya land. This could create another issue, however, as the Gabaya people only represent a third of the nation and not everyone. So that could upset people of other ethnic groups. We could instead look for an ethnic group from the land's past. Apparently, some of the area's earliest settlers were people who spoke Ubangian languages, meaning we could give the country the name Ubangia or something along those lines. Then we have that final option, naming the land after a specific person. For this one person in particular comes to mind, that being their former first president, Barthélemy Boganda, the guy who gave them this dull name in the first place. He was instrumental in forming the country into what it is today, so is undoubtedly a worthy person to name the land after. We could simply go with the name Bogandia if we were to name after him, though he is far from the only person of note from the Central African Republic. Looking into their history, I stumbled across someone named Elizabeth Domitian. She was Prime Minister here, and was actually the first female Prime Minister in any African country. That's a great claim to fame, and one worthy of naming a place after. Domitia has a great ring to it. Of course, these are all just my ideas. They could pick one or go with something else entirely, but as already mentioned, a name change for this land seemingly isn't on the cards. So despite the fact we all now know a lot of thought went into the naming of this country, it seems that for the foreseeable future, the Central African Republic will continue being, in my eyes, the country with the worst name. Name Explain depends on viewers like yourself supporting the channel financially on Patreon, so a huge thank you to everyone who does. Donating just $1 a month helps the channel amazingly and gets you bonuses including ad-free videos, exclusive content, the power to request ideas to be made into actual Name Explain videos, and your name at the end of the video with all these awesome people. Visit patreon.com/Name Explain or click the link down below to find out how you too can support the channel. Thank you. Thanks for reaching the end of the video. Why not watch another and subscribe to keep up to date on all things Name Explain. You can find myself on Instagram where I'm NameExplainYT and join the Facebook group Friends of Name Explain to talk with myself and other name nerds. All that will be linked down below. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video and once again, thank you all so much.